Hello, hello. Welcome to One Wild World, a podcast by The Echo. I'm your host, Matthew Juneau.
And I'm the editor, Mike Davis.
Mike, I want to start by pointing out that so often in these conversations about animals, conservation, and the environment, you'll hear the term biodiversity. This term, of course, refers to the sheer variety in species that exist in the world or within a particular habitat or ecosystem.
It is a pretty important word in our world today. And if you didn't know the meaning of that word before, I challenge you to start using that word 3 times a day.
I might even triple dog dare some people to hit the 3-word a day minimum. It's a minimum.
Wow, throwing haymakers over here.
Yep, really want people to be talking about it. But I do think that biodiversity should be at the forefront of people's minds on a regular basis, if not every day, because as humans, we actively benefit from high biodiversity, and dare I say, we even rely on it. Biodiversity is what allows us to continue to enjoy fresh water, fertile soil, and plant pollination. Plus, these are vital services that provide the foundation for the production of food, medicine, and countless other things.
And I know that there was that New York Times article claiming that at least 40% of the world economy is derived from biological resources.
Yeah, our biological resources are immensely valuable and could even be considered priceless, which is why people can get so passionate about protecting good old Mother Nature. I remember hearing that one time an activist even sat in a tree for 738 days in order to protect a forest.
Wow. They have officially graduated from tree hugger to tree dweller, as far as I'm concerned. And that is true dedication to the cause.
Yeah, perhaps we could use more of these tree dweller types, especially since deforestation and habitat fragmentation are 2 of the biggest threats to biodiversity. And all of that plays into why I want to try something new with this week's round of
What's That Animal?
Prick up your ears because I'm about to play some ambient noise from a forest. And I want you to count all the different animals you can distinguish. Bonus points if you can already identify some of them too. So, for the first time, here's the sound. Ooh, this sound is just so calming to hear. And that's probably why there are countless hours of these types of sound on YouTube. So, I'll even give out more bonus points if you can guess where this forest is located. One more time, here's the sound. Stay tuned for one more chance to listen at the end of the episode. Today, we're joined by Maia Holmes. She's an education and outreach coordinator for Colorado State University's Department of Agricultural Biology, as well as the director of the CSU Bug Zoo. Let's head over to that conversation now. So I'm hoping you can get started by telling us a little bit about how you got excited about animals or wildlife, and then how that journey led you to the Bug Zoo and your role with the Department of Ag Bio.
Yeah, so like many people I'm sure you've talked to, I've always loved animals. Humans might not be my favorite animal, but I like humans too. I grew up from a very young age wanting to be somewhere between Steve Irwin and Jane Goodall. Which is unusual for like a 4-year-old being like, no, I want to be a field biologist. And most people were like, you want to be a vet because you like animals. And I was like, no, I want to be a field biologist. And so I went to school to become a herpetologist, which is reptiles and amphibians. And while doing that, I took a class called Insects, Science, and Society because a friend was like, oh, you like weird stuff. You should take this class. And I took it and was like, oh, actually, this is super interesting. I had never been like afraid of bugs or anything like that, but didn't realize how amazing they were. And so I started volunteering in the bug zoo. And during that time, started to do outreaches, which is something I hadn't ever done before. So you get to bring animals to public events and talk to the public about why animals are so exciting. And I was doing outreach with a couple of different groups at the time. And by the end of the semester, I was like, can I keep doing this for free? And they were like, if you're doing it for free, absolutely. And then over time, I got hired to do it. And then I graduated. When I graduated, I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. I graduated with a degree in conservation biology. I knew I wanted to do something with talking to the public and something about conservation. And so I was recommended by my department head to go to grad school. So in grad school, I got my master's in entomology, but with a special focus on science communication and education. So how do you talk to the public about entomology, which is something most people don't want to talk to if it's more than just spray and squish them. That was several years ago, and so now I'm the education and outreach coordinator for the department, and I've been running the bug zoo now for 7 years, so it's been a lot of fun.
Excellent. For listeners that might not know, I know you broke down what herpetology is, lizards and amphibians. What is entomology, the study of?
Entomology is the study of all arthropods, and arthropods are this incredible group of animals that are what people usually refer to as bugs. And so it's arachnids, things like millipedes and centipedes, even crustaceans, and then insects as well. The three things that animals need to be counted as an arthropod is having 6 or more legs, having no backbone, so being invertebrates, and having an exoskeleton, so living with their hard bits on the outside and their squishy bits on the inside.
Yeah, we're going to keep breaking down these words and defining them. Like you threw out invertebrate. So animals like snails, slugs, squids would be invertebrates, but they're not going to be insects because they don't have that exoskeleton, even though they have 6 or more legs.
Correct, because they are lacking that exoskeleton. Yeah, my favorite one to trick people with is snails, because people think that they have an exoskeleton, but that's actually not an exoskeleton. That's an internal structure that they have on the outside, which is weird.
Yeah. Internal structure on the outside is different. Can you break down the difference between bugs and insects?
Yeah, so there's 2 ways that bug gets used. There's the casual conversational bug. You can talk to people about what they count as bugs. It's one of my favorite things to do. And people will count anything from worms to spiders to flies, right? But in entomology, a true bug is an insect that is within a group of insects. It's called a hemipteran. And so a true bug is anything that has like a shield-shaped back and has a piercing sucking mouth part. So if you think about something like a stink bug or box elder bug, an assassin bug or an ambush bug, those are all true bugs. And so all bugs are insects, but not all insects are bugs. But that's kind of confusing because the public also uses bugs so loosely. And so I use bug pretty loosely because that's who I'm usually talking to. I call it the bug zoo and not the arthropod zoo, because if I say it's a bug zoo, people almost instantaneously have an idea of what's in the bug zoo. But if I called it the arthropod zoo, I spend a lot of time trying to explain what was in the zoo. So bugs, I count anything that's an arthropod as a bug, but the true definition of bug has to do with it being in a very specific family of a very specific order of insects.
And then insects, like you said, all true bugs are insects. Not all insects are true bugs. What are the requirements to be an insect? Because I know people often think, oh, spiders are insects, but they're not.
No, they aren't. Yeah, close spiders are arthropods. Spiders are arachnids, and that's part of arthropods. Insects have wings. They're one of the only animals besides a couple of mammals and birds that you can think of that have true wings. They have 3 body segments. They've got the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. 1 pair of antennae, so 2 antennae to sense with. And then they've got 6 legs. As long as nothing terrible has happened to them, they should never have more than 6 legs.
Exactly. Spiders tripped me up for a long time as soon as I learned that when I was like, spiders aren't insects? But yeah, they're arachnids. And then, yeah, I kind of like the general term of bug going forward for probably the rest of the podcast. I'm going to refer to everything as bugs unless I want to get nitty gritty and call them insects or invertebrates. So it's good to set those terms. Thanks for being flexible with my verbiage today. So can you tell us a little bit about the bug zoo and your goals with it, how it operates, things like that?
Sure. So the Bug Zoo is a collection of living arthropods. We've got a lot of tarantulas, and then we have insects and some other arthropods as well. We've got some hermit crabs. The goal is to bring live arthropods around the state of Colorado to get people excited about entomology, because oftentimes people have very short, frequent interactions with bugs, and it's things like, ooh, it's a spider, squish it, or oh, this mosquito made me itchy, squish it, or I just don't like them, let's exterminate them. And so the goal of the zoo is to get people excited about this incredible world of arthropods. I mean, there's more bugs on the planet than people for sure. There's, I think, something like 3 million ants per human on the planet, and that's just ants alone. We see about 50,000 people a year in our outreaches, and it's a lot of fun. I don't know, it's the best job I've ever had. I get paid to talk to people about bugs all over, so.
That is a very good job. One thing I'm hoping you can expand on is how do you reach and excite people about bugs? Because I think there is that stigma against them, especially as people get older. So I know it's probably easier to excite kids about it. Do you have any tips or tricks for maybe if an adult brings their kid and the adult's more standoffish? Like, how do you excite adults about insects when they have that stigma?
Yeah, you're totally right. I don't have to do anything to get kids excited about bugs. Bugs just do it all on their own. I think personally that everybody probably would find arthropods and bugs exciting. It's just that the fear and the stigma around bugs is learned. And so oftentimes it's because an adult has taught a kid that there's something they should be afraid of. And so by the time I'm talking to adults who are oftentimes afraid or sometimes disgusted by bugs, it's really getting to the root of, well, what part of it is scary or gross? A lot of what people think about is, oh, it's okay to not like bugs because they're dangerous. And it turns out most bugs aren't. One of the things I do is I bring a black widow to my outreaches because black widows have a whole bunch of associations with them, not supported by science. And so one of the things is talking and engaging people in conversations about why they think they're gross or why they think they're scary, talking about just the general things they do. I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, people are freaked out by black widows, and then they're really boring spiders. They don't do much. They're a lot smaller than people think they are. They don't kill anybody. And so just talking to people about what part they think is scary, and then a lot of what scares people is unknown, right? So if I don't know something or I don't know anything about something, that's way scarier than if I've learned a couple of things about that. And that helps get people excited into exploring more about those animals. And so I found that meeting people where they're at with their comfort level and then inviting them to explore it more has worked pretty well. I do occasionally get people who are like, nope, nothing you tell me is going to change my mind. I'm going to still squish spiders. And you can't win everybody over. But for the most part, by the time people leave, they're like, whoa, I think I'm going to get a pet spider. So spiders are definitely the sticky point. Cockroaches also can be one that people appreciate them from a distance, but getting people to hold cockroaches can be an issue sometimes as well.
It's kind of been a running theme in some of the episodes that in every field, there are all of these misconceptions that are out there just like doing harm to the actual bugs or the snakes. So I'm curious if there's any misconceptions that you want to break down right now. Potentially also if you know anything about like daddy long legs. I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions about daddy long legs.
I would say as far as daddy long legs go, there's one, which is that a lot of people have heard, oh, daddy long legs are the most poisonous spider on the planet, except their mouth parts are too small to break human skin. And there's like 8 things wrong with that. The first one is poison would mean you'd have to eat them. They are distasteful. So if you do eat a daddy long legs, it's really bitter and like nasty and it makes you spit it out. I don't know if that counts as a true poison, but if it's biting you, it's venom. So they're not poisonous necessarily, but they're also not venomous. So they don't have any mouth parts at all that could pierce skin. They are actually a scavenger. So they're eating dead stuff. So they don't produce any venom. They also have incredibly weak jaws. because they're eating stuff that's decaying. Another issue is that they're not spiders at all. They are still arachnids, but they aren't true spiders. They're in their own little group called Opiliones. And so they are completely harmless animals that don't kill anything. And I think the reason that urban legends started is because one of the things they will eat is other animals that can be painful or dangerous. And so there's a series of photos out there of daddy longlegs eating centipedes and daddy longlegs eating dead scorpions and wasps and things like that, bigger spiders. And if you see that, you think to yourself, oh, it must have killed and eaten that thing that I know is dangerous and venomous, and therefore it must be even more dangerous and venomous, right? Another thing might be, oh, here's this really scary thing. Look at how brave I am because I can hold it. And that gets kids excited because they're like, oh, this is actually the most dangerous thing in the world, but I can pick it up. And that makes me feel safe and secure and strong. And so I think there's a couple of things with daddy long legs that happen. But at the end of the day, unless you're already decaying, you don't have to worry about them, even if you're a small bug.
Great. I know that's one of my favorites. And I'm so glad that you broke down the definition between poison and venom. Once you know the difference, you see it incorrectly all over the place. Listeners, now you'll start to hear it everywhere. Where do you get the bugs that are part of the bug zoo?
Sure. So I'd say about probably like 60 or 70% of what we have in the bug zoo are tarantulas, because people get pet tarantulas and don't realize how long they live. So tarantulas can live into their 30s or 40s, and people get them and think that it's a short-lived animal, and then they get bored with them. So many of our tarantulas are donated pets. We've got about 40 in the zoo right now, and 35 of them were people's pets that they then donated after a few years. Same story with the hermit crabs. Hermit crabs can live for decades. And so our hermit crabs were donated as well. I did purchase some of our cockroaches. I've also had some of our cockroach colonies donated. Some of them are, like our black widows, are wild caught because people get them in their house and they don't want them in their houses. And so they'll put them in a jar and drop them off at the zoo. And so we give them a place. We use them for educational purposes. And then a couple of things that I couldn't get otherwise, I did get at an exotic pet store.
Is there a species that you have in the zoo that you're most excited about?
That's a really good question. Right now, we have what I think is an Oleos giganteus, which is a giant crab spider. Have you seen those images out of Australia of the giant huntsman spiders? So this is the North American version of the giant huntsman spider. It's not nearly as big as the Australian, but our female is probably about 3 or 4 inches across wingspan, which is pretty big for a non-tarantula spider. And she has laid a bunch of different egg cases. So we're on the 3rd egg case. And so now we have baby giant crab spiders, which I'm really excited about because I haven't worked with a lot of huntsmen before. And that was another donation that someone brought in. And so I'm very excited about that.
Awesome. Yeah, that is a pretty cool thing, especially to keep that generation going. Is there anything special about taking care of young bugs as opposed to a young cat or dog?
Oh my God, it's so much easier with cats or dogs, particularly because it's very unlikely that you'll be taking care of 100 cats or dogs at the same time. But when you're working with insects and arthropods, they have hundreds of babies throughout a year, especially something like tarantulas, where some species of tarantula have 1,500 babies per egg case. You have to separate them because they'll eat each other, and then you have to take care of them. When they emerge, they're really tiny, so you have to find really tiny food for them to eat because they're all carnivores. And so it takes a lot of time, and just knowing that, okay, if a cat had 8 kittens, it's likely that 7 or 8 of those will make it to adulthood in captivity. With spiders, even if you do everything right, maybe 40% would make it to adulthood probably. So it's a rough life being an arthropod. That exoskeleton is like a suit of armor. So every time they have to grow, it's like if you had to pull yourself out of a rigid morph suit. So if you think of like a onesie or a full body suit, but you don't get fingers, you don't get hands, you have to just wiggle your way out of it. And when they molt, they have to pull out part of their gut system and their entire respiratory system as well. And so if anything goes wrong, they can starve and suffocate at the same time. And so many don't make it to adulthood because something happens along the way, which is why they have so many babies. So taking care of a bunch of baby arthropods is a lot different because humidity is a bigger issue, temperature and daylight cycles are a bigger issue. And then even if you do everything right, the likelihood of you getting a high level of success is different. Like a high level of success would be 60% instead of like 80 or 90%. So you have a lot more that don't make it.
And then I think people would also be surprised by the diversity of behaviors that bugs and insects can show. Are there any behaviors that you've witnessed in your time with the bug zoo that surprised you?
Absolutely. One of the things that I find so interesting is the differences in legitimate personalities between tarantulas. So we'll have several different individuals of the same species, and even within the same species, you'll have different personalities, just like other animals that people keep as pets. An example would be we've got 10 rose hair tarantulas, and they're all in their 30s. Some of them are really laid back and I wouldn't say friendly, but more easy to talk into being held than other rose hair tarantulas in our collection that are just like, nope, I'm mad. I don't like this. You looked at me wrong. I'm cranky. Some of them are always cranky. Some of them have on days and off days. Luckily, tarantulas are pretty verbal about having bad days. They'll tell you very quickly that they don't want to get handled. Some just never do, and some are just always okay with it. And so just the different personalities that tarantulas have, there's trends within species, right? There's some species that no one would ever say, oh, you should hold those. But even within species that are considered more docile, you have different personalities, which I think is so cool because people think of them as basically tiny little computers, right? They sleep and move and mate, and that's it. They don't have anything else more complicated going on. Hermit crabs have favorite foods. I think that's also really interesting. So each little hermit crab has its own personality and has a favorite food. How can you look at that and not think that's adorable, right? Everybody has favorite foods, and hermit crabs also have favorite foods.
That's awesome. I think most of the time I like talking about behavior because cats and dogs get brought up so often just because people are exposed to that so much. So they'll come home and they'll be like, oh man, my dog got into the trash and you could see how guilty it was. Or I got it like a new bandana and it was so excited. And then it's really interesting to see that personality or behavior isn't just something that's uniquely mammal. It goes across the whole board. I worked at a science discovery center and we had a bearded dragon that we would bring out, and her name was Clementine. She was like a rock star. Kids would be able to touch her. She was very handleable. It was great. And she passed away while I was there, and we got another bearded dragon. And I think the idea was like, yeah, like we'll just get another bearded dragon and it'll be able to like do the shows. And that bearded dragon was more introverted. It was just like, no, if you try to pick me up, I'm going to run around the cage.
Yeah, same can happen with tarantulas. I mean, there are so many different species of tarantulas. There's species traits. So for the longest time, people really liked rose hair tarantulas because they're the most handleable. And so a general trend is that they're more handleable than, say, other species. But we've got a couple that have not been handleable for 25, 30 years. And that's just who they are. They are tarantulas that do not want to get handled at all. So yeah, bearded dragons is a perfect example of that. I've met some really laid back bearded dragons, and I've met some absolute monsters of bearded dragons.
There's some jerks out there for sure.
Yeah.
Is there any specific species that you just can't work with or that don't work well in the bug zoo that maybe you've tried before that it just turns out like, well, for one reason or another, it's just not going to work out with this one?
Yeah. Part of what determines what you can even have in a bug zoo is legality and permitting with the USDA, because so many arthropods can be invasive species. And so there's pretty strict permitting. So what I can have on permits really restricts what I can have in the bug zoo. Some things I absolutely won't have in the bug zoo, even if they aren't unpermitted, are things that are dangerous. So certain kinds of scorpions I won't have in the bug zoo. Certain kinds of centipedes I won't have in the bug zoo. Certain kinds of tarantulas, not because I'm grouping them with something that's dangerous. Tarantulas, in my opinion, aren't as dangerous as people make them sound. It's just some are what we call a pet hole, where you get them and then they live in their burrow and you never see them. We have a tarantula in the bug zoo that's been there for 6 or 7 years now, and I have seen it twice. And so we know it's alive because if you shine a light and you can see it moving, but it has not come out of its hole. So those are ones I generally try to avoid because, gosh, is that boring to come to a zoo and see. Some of the other ones I don't keep is anything that is really, really specific on needing a certain kind of food that I can only get part of the year. There's this group of grasshoppers that are huge, and they're called lubber grasshoppers, and they're so awesome, and I would love to keep them in the zoo, but the ones that we have in Colorado eat sunflowers. And for a couple months of the year, like sunflowers, so easy to get a hold of. I've got hundreds in my backyard. But as soon as it gets cold and the sunflowers die out, suddenly it's really hard to feed them. So anything that I can't have easy access to their food year round is something I don't usually keep in the zoo.
Gotcha. I'm hoping you can give a little credibility to maybe one of the invertebrates that probably gets the most hate in the world, and that's the mosquito. Can you explain the importance of the mosquito and why it's good to have mosquitoes around?
Sure. People only think about mosquitoes in their relationship with mosquitoes. So either as something that best case scenario bites you and makes you itchy, and worst case scenario bites you and gives you a disease that can be lethal. It turns out most of the species of mosquitoes in the world don't even feed on humans. And so one of the things that I think is really missed talking to people about different groups of animals is when you talk to somebody who studies something like otters or canids or something like that, at most they're talking about like, oh, there's 60 different species of this vertebrate. When you're talking about entomology, if you're focusing on something like mosquitoes, there's literally hundreds of thousands of different kinds of species. So when it comes to beetles, there are more species of beetles on the planet than plants, fungi, and algae combined. There's over 1 million known species of just beetles. So when you talk about mosquitoes in a group, humans interact with a very, very small portion of the kinds of mosquitoes out there. And there's hundreds of thousands of other kinds of mosquitoes out there that people don't even interact with because they're not a kind that feeds on humans. So writing off all mosquitoes as horrible and annoying, I think is a little unfair because most of them don't do anything to humans. They are really, really important because they are something that is providing a huge amount of food for a lot of different animals. So either as larvae, so baby mosquitoes in the water, huge resource of food for fish and other aquatic arthropods and other animals that are eating small invertebrates. And then the adults as well are really, really important for many other animals. So if you think about dragonflies eat a ton of mosquitoes, and people love dragonflies. Bats also eat a bunch of different mosquitoes out there. And so they're totally underappreciated. Some mosquitoes out there eat other mosquitoes, which is really cool. So there's a whole world of mosquitoes out there, but because people don't really like them, a lot of people are ready to write off all mosquitoes. So one of the things that I think is really interesting right now is looking at ways we can do genetic work to modify mosquitoes so that they are less likely to spread diseases, because they do spread a ton of diseases to humans, but like 2% of mosquitoes eat human blood, and it's only the females that do that. All these other species of mosquitoes are feeding off of other animals' blood. And so another really cool thing that's happening right now is using mosquitoes to actually sample biodiversity. What you can do is you can go into areas and set up mosquito traps, and then mosquitoes will feed on blood and then go and rest to digest that food. And so if you catch them at that point, you can actually extract the blood from the mosquito and do DNA work. And so if they're feeding on animals that are really hard to locate and get accurate population counts, or even just are they in this area, you can have mosquitoes do the leg work for you. And they've got 6 legs, so it's easier for them to do leg work.
Wonderful. There we go. So now next time you get a bug bite from a mosquito, we have a little bit of knowledge of, okay, even though this itch is really bad right now and I'm maybe not happy with that mosquito, there's some good things that mosquitoes provide in the world.
And if you catch it early enough and you wash the area with soap and water, it denatures the saliva, which is what makes it itchy. So if you catch it early enough, you can make it not even itchy.
All right. All sorts of good things for mosquitoes. So I think a lot of ways people interact with bugs or think about it is spiders in the home. And maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but spiders are pretty good. They'll catch and eat other bugs in the house. So they're not all bad. But is there a best way to maybe take and release bugs? And how far do you have to take a spider before it won't come back into your house?
Whew, that's a tough one. In my personal opinion, removing spiders from your house is a bit of a Sisyphusian task, because they got into your house no problem. If you move them, they can just use the same method to come back in. So if you're somebody who is like a diehard arachnophobe and you absolutely don't want spiders in your house, preventing them from getting there in the first place is a good option. So making sure all your screens are intact, putting door strips, weather strips on all of your exterior doors is a good idea. If you absolutely want to get rid of a spider, I use the cup and paper method. Personally, I don't move spiders out of my house anymore, but I understand I'm on a far end of a spectrum of spider tolerance. But yeah, the cup method where you gently put a cup over it and then walk it onto a piece of paper and release it outside. You don't have to go very far, but you could if you wanted to. I don't think anyone's done studies on what the home range is of a spider. But if they're inside, it's because they've chosen to come inside, which means they're just going to come back in. Humans have this whole concept that like nature is outside and inside is not nature, and we're not participating in ecosystems. And actually, ecosystems are everything on the other side of my front door. But homes are an ecosystem, and homes are part of nature. And to a spider, it's just another environment that's great. I mean, there's humidity. Sometimes there's delicious food there. It's a lot more weather and temperature controlled. And so your house is great. You like living in your house. Other animals would too, like spiders. I think the biggest thing to learn about spiders is that almost all of them are totally fine. As far as the hundreds of different species of spider out there, I think there's 3,000 different species of spider on the planet. And out of those 3,000, I'll say 4 are medically significant. One of them is the black widow, and if you do get bitten and it does use its venom, it's really unpleasant. It hurts. It can make you throw up. It lasts for about 6 to 8 hours, and that's it. So there's been 3 deaths in the US in 100 years, and that's including toddlers. It's not necessarily something that's going to kill you, which is not really what the media talks about when they talk about black widows. Again, I wouldn't say, hey, go get bitten by a black widow. It does hurt, and it's not fun, but it's not usually lethal. So that's one that's medically significant. I wouldn't consider it super dangerous. The brown recluse has been having quite a moment in the last 10 years online about having necrotic tissue and people having to get their limbs amputated if you get bitten by a brown recluse. And every case of that that's been investigated, it isn't a brown recluse bite. It's actually a bacterial infection. And so usually you get something like a staph infection or a MRSA infection. Those are different bacteria that live on your skin already. And if they get into your skin, that's when it's a problem. And so that can happen, sure, from something biting you like a spider, but it could also get introduced into your system through getting mosquito bite and scratching it too much and breaking the skin, or brushing up against a bush that has thorns, right? So the spider takes the fall, but it turns out it's not really the spider's fault. Less than, I think it's about 5% of humans even react to their venom. And most people who do get maybe a blister, maybe some nausea, tenderness in the area, but that whole like necrotic tissue thing, it's all been MRSA. It's all been bacteria infections and not really the spider. Again, people can have medical reactions, but a little blister is not nearly as bad as what the internet makes it sound like. So already half of my short list of spiders that I care about is 2 of which I don't really worry about. And then the last 2 are ones we don't really get in the US. There's the Sydney funnel weaving spider, which is only found within 100 kilometers of Sydney, Australia. It is one that I would consider the most dangerous because it doesn't behave like normal spiders, and it does have a venom that can be seriously medically significant. It can kill people. But the good news is they made an anti-venom in the 80s, and no one's died since the 80s from a bite from one of them. And then the other is the Brazilian wandering spider, which is not a banana spider, because a banana spider is something different. Common names are silly, but people kill a lot of innocent spiders because they also have the common name of banana spiders. But the Brazilian wandering spider is pretty medically significant. You can die from it. You can be in the hospital for weeks if you do get bitten by it. And also very few people ever see them and interact with them. So sure, they can be really, really venomous, but the likelihood of you interacting with them is very low unless you're someone who harvests bananas in Brazil. And the spiders aren't running around being like, who can I bite today? Gosh, I would really like to use up my venom to mess up somebody's life right now. Spiders have venom to eat. If they use up their venom on you, that means that they can't protect themselves for a while afterwards, and they can't eat. So spiders really use venom usually as a last resource. They're pretty communicative about not wanting to bite, and they really only bite as a way to protect themselves. So if you're looking at them and not poking them, you're not going to get bitten by a spider. So I leave spiders in the house, but the cup method works well.
Kind of pivoting to the other side of appreciation for spiders, are there any wonderfully unique or really interesting bugs that we have in the US that you want to shine some light on right now?
Oh boy. I mean, all of them are beautiful and unique, right?
Yeah.
In the US alone, I think one of the things that's super interesting right now is the Aphonopelma hensi, which is a tarantula that's the most common tarantula in the US. It spreads from like Tennessee all the way across to California. and it keeps on changing how many species it actually is. Like in Colorado alone, we used to say, oh, it's 6 different species, but they all look similar. And then we started doing more genetic work, and then it's like, actually, it's 1 species. And then it goes back to being like, well, what counts as a species? And it turns out that because they live in little holes and they only travel a short distance to find each other to mate, it has opened up this whole debate about what counts as a species. Are you counting everybody who lives in this one little valley because they're not going to mate with somebody on the other side of the valley? Or do they all count as one species if they're from Tennessee to Colorado, right? And so I think that's super interesting. I also think that they are so underappreciated because they're really common and people just call them boring brown tarantulas, but they're beautiful. They're like velvety black with chocolate brown legs. They're gorgeous. They're pretty docile. And you get to call them an Aphonopelma hensi complex instead of just like a species. So I think that's neat. But I encourage everyone to just start looking at the arthropods that live around you because, like I mentioned before, there might be 1 or 2 different kinds of wildcat in your area or 1 or 2 different kinds of wild dog in your entire state. And like in Colorado alone, we have 900 species of native bee. So just the level of how many things are out there is astronomically larger. So you can get into so many different awesome things. There's some super incredible animals out there when you start looking at invertebrates and especially entomology. So my favorite thing about entomology is you can spend your whole life researching entomology and learning as much as you can. And we will never, ever learn all there is to know about entomology because we don't even know how many different kinds of arthropods are on the planet. Some might find that daunting, but I think that's so exciting because there's so much we can still learn and discover about them.
Sort of the more you learn, the more you know that you don't know.
The less you know about something, the more you feel like you know about it. You'll never get bored with it, which I think is just so exciting.
Yeah, that is really exciting. There's always more to know with bugs. And then what are the best ways that people can support the Bug Zoo and your work?
I mean, the easiest, best way that everyone can do is go out and discover the bugs in your own backyard or in your house, in your bathroom maybe, and just realize that they're like these awesome, incredible animals that are just as complex and interesting as the vertebrates that people oftentimes like to talk about. There's also financial donations. We can donate to the CSU Bug Zoo or donate to your local zoo. So most zoos have invertebrates and arthropods. There's several different invertebrate and butterfly houses. Almost every state has one. So I'd recommend that, but I won't say no to donations to the CSU Bug Zoo either. But I think the biggest thing is just be open to exploring the world of entomology because you don't have to go very far. It's right there. So I think that's like the best thing you can do.
Excellent. Well, Maia, thanks so much for being on the podcast talking today. I say this pretty much every time I have a guest on, but I feel like I learn so much during these conversations. And so it's just great to learn a little bit more about what is a bug? What is an insect? How do those get defined? Where does that all play out? So thanks so much for being part of it.
Of course. And you're welcome to use bug however you want to. Some people even count snails. So
Excellent. Well, thanks again. I'm always so grateful to have these conversations with our guests. It really is inspiring to hear them talk about the animals they work with, and I always learn so much. I think that's especially true anytime I learn about insects and invertebrates, since my expertise is more mammal-based. Maia is a natural at conveying the wonder and intrinsic value of insects. And that is exactly why she's a great fit for her job at the CSU Bug Zoo. So, if you get a chance to visit the Bug Zoo, you absolutely should. Now, let's give you one more chance to hear the soothing sounds of the forest as we listen for how much biodiversity they contain. What you've just heard is the collective sounds of the Amazon rainforest, which is the world's largest rainforest and one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth. In 2010, it was estimated that there are more than 46,000 different species that call this jungle their home. I know I've said this about other things too, but that's pretty wild. Our planet's biodiversity is a raw measurement of the rich array of plant and animal interactions that can keep our global ecosystem in balance. And there are few things more important for us to protect. One of the best things to protect our biodiversity is to be more conscious of the products you buy, opting for the more eco-friendly options whenever you can. This can be as easy as reducing the amount of single-use papers and plastics you use, perhaps writing or printing on the back of a piece of paper instead of using a fresh one, or avoiding single-use plastics altogether. This mentality applies to food products as well, since everything is produced under different conditions. So, hopefully we can all move forward knowing we're taking care of our planet a little bit better. Stay tuned next time for another round of
What's that animal?
If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe and consider supporting us directly at patreon.com/onewildpodcast. Here, you'll find exclusive content, like the full video versions of our conversations. To find out more about the other work we do, visit our website at onewildpodcast.com. Follow us on Instagram at @theechoanimals, and follow our TikTok at creature.feature. On behalf of all animals, thank you for listening.